Good afternoon, everybody. Calling to order our April 20th, 2026 meeting of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority hearing committee. Noting the start time is 1:17 p.m. Welcome to fellow committee members, staff, and our guests. I'm Dean Trentowski. I am the Vice Chair of Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and chairing today's meeting. Brian Petrie, our chair, is absent today. So just a reminder that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. You'll see that the squares above us, when they're lit up in green light, that means the microphone is on. We're being recorded, and any side conversations that you might have, please refrain, as those would be picked up by the microphone as well. First of all, first order of business is an approval of the agenda that was circulated by staff last week. Looking for a mover and seconder to approve the agenda, approved by Mark, Sandy. Any further discussion? If not, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Second, declaration of conflicts of interest. I look to the members at this time if there's any conflict of interest that needs to be declared. Okay, seeing none, just as a reminder, as the meeting progresses, should the need arise, please notify the chair accordingly. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting from the January 27th, 2026 committee. Looking to see if there's any, well, first of all, we need to adopt those minutes presented. So Sandy, will you do that? Jim? Okay, any discussion on those minutes from the members? Seeing none, looking for approval. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Checking with the clerk, there's no business arising from those minutes. Okay. So we will move on to item 5, and the item to consider today is application number 195-24. It is the proposed development upon hazardous lands subject to flooding hazards within a UTRCA regulated area located at 5626 Pegram Line, Mount Elgin, Township of Southwest Oxford. So first of all, in order to get things started, I have to look for a motion to sit as a hearing committee. The proposed wording for the motion reads as follows: to sit as a hearing committee to consider application number 195-24 by Kevin Connor Payton and their agent Paula Lombardi, to consider development within a riverine flood hazard associated with a river or stream valley and within an area regulated by the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority at 5626 Pegram Line, Mount Elgin, within the Township of Southwest Oxford. Moved by Mark, second by Sandy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay. So now, once again, hearing committee, if you have any conflicts to declare related to the hearing, please indicate to the chair now or at any time during the course of the meeting as the need arises. Okay, seeing none declared, look for a roll call. So I'll turn that over to the clerk for roll call.
Need to call roll call for the members?
Yes.
Okay. Jim Craigmile?
Here.
Andy Levin?
Here.
Mark Schadenberg?
Here.
Jim Kwiatkowski?
Here. And noting that Brian Petrie is absent for this meeting. So, chairman's remarks for conducting a hearing. Under the applicable regulations, I'm obligated to read out this page in its entirety, so please bear with me. We are now going to conduct a hearing under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act in respect of an application made by Kevin Connor Peyton and their agent, Paul Lombardi. Application number 195-24 proposes development within an area regulated by the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority at 5626 Pegram Line, Mount Elgin, within the township of Southwest Oxford. The authority has adopted regulations under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act, which requires a permit from the authority for activities otherwise prohibited by the act. The authority may issue a permit if in its opinion, A, the activity is not likely to affect the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or unstable soil or bedrock, and B, the activity is not likely to create conditions or circumstances that, in the event of a natural hazard, might jeopardize the health and safety of persons or result in the damage or destruction of property. The staff have reviewed the application materials, and a copy of the staff report has been given to the hearing committee and the applicant in advance of this meeting. The Conservation Authorities Act, Section 28.1, Part 5 states, an authority shall not refuse an application for a permit or attach conditions to a permit unless the applicant for the permit has been given an opportunity to be heard by the authority. In holding this hearing, the hearings committee is to determine whether or not to issue a permit with or without conditions. In doing so, we can only consider the material that is before us, the staff report, such evidence as may be given, and the submissions to be made on behalf of the applicant. The proceedings will be conducted according to the Statutory Powers Procedure Act. Under Section 5 of the Canada Evidence Act, a witness may refuse to answer any question on the ground that the answer may tend to incriminate the person or may tend to establish his or her liability to a civil proceeding at the instance of the Crown or of any person. The procedure in general shall be informal without the evidence before it being given under oath or affirmation. If the applicant has any questions to ask of the hearing committee or of the authority representative, they must be directed to the chair. I will ask staff to please introduce the hearing participants at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can introduce the three members at the table who intend to participate today. We have the applicant, Kevin Patton, and to his right is his agent, Paula Lombardi. And then we also have Jack Spreet from Spreet and Associates Engineers.
All right. Okay, and again, I'll start off with the introductions on the hearing committee members and then ask my colleagues to follow. So my name is Dean Trentowski, Vice Chair of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and member of the hearings committee. And on the board of directors, I represent the municipality of West Perth.
Sandy Levin, board member, hearings committee member, appointed by the city of London.
Mark Schadenberg, member of the Woodstock City Council, second term on this board, and I'm on the hearings committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Craigmile. It's my first term on the Upper Thames board, also on the hearing committee. I'm a councillor of the town of St. Mary's, and I also represent Perth South and South Huron.
Good. Thank you, colleagues. So at this time, I'll turn to the applicant. Mr. Patton, go ahead.
I will allow my lawyer to.
Oh,
Yes.
Go ahead.
And I'm happy to go first, but I thought Mr. Gordon.
No, I just introductions, so but I guess Joe's already done that. I just, if there was anything more you want to add, so.
No, I do have one comment though, if I could. I wanted to thank you all very much because I appreciate you accommodating the time. I know this is not a regular hearing date, so very much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, so noted. Thank you, Paula. All right, so I guess now the introductions have been concluded. I will turn to Upper Thames staff who will indicate the nature and location of the subject application and conclusions. So I'll turn the floor over to Joe Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we set up the presentation, I'll start with the staff report. So as you've identified, the application is for 5626 Pilgrim Line within Mount Elgin and in the township of Southwest Oxford. This map shows the general location of the property, which has frontage along Pilgrim Road and located between Prouse Road and Dome Drive within the municipality. In accordance with our regulated area mapping, the subject property is affected by the regulations under the Conservation Authorities Act because it's located within a river or stream valley, Reynolds Creek. It's located within hazardous lands that are subject to flooding hazards. And there are a couple of wetlands associated with the property, and all of the proposed development is outside the 30-meter buffer. So wetlands are not a concern for this development. But this property, you can see the subject property highlighted in red. And the yellow line represents the regulatory jurisdiction and where permits are required for any types of development. So this is just kind of, as you can see, the majority of the property does contain a large offline water body. But towards the western side of the property along Pilgrim Road, we have a single detached dwelling, some accessory buildings. We can see Reynolds Creek traverses kind of the southwest corner, and the main driveway has access off of Pilgrim Road. When we also talk about existing conditions, we have been advised by the road superintendent for the township that this road has been experienced with road closures in the past due to flooding. And this just represents a tweet from 2020 that's representing prior road closures due to flooding concerns in the area. So the application that's been submitted is for construction of an accessory residential unit, or abbreviated referred to as an ARU, on the property zone general agricultural zone within what's identified as a floodplain under the Reynolds Creek drain within the township of Southwest Oxford. And I just kind of, on this diagram, you can see the approximate location of where the ARU is proposed. It's submitted in support of the application. There are several drawings of different matters that have been submitted to make it a complete application. Of primary interest is there are topographic surveys, grading plans that have been produced for the driveway and the area of the proposed ARU, as well as some additional survey elevations on the road of Pilgrim Line. So as part of the ARU, we've got a set of drawings that kind of shows the building, which references a barndominium. Half of the building is proposed to be garage, where the other half represents a 2-bedroom residential dwelling unit. I just wanted to look at the legislative policy considerations that staff have considered for this development, starting with the Conservation Authorities Act. These are the primary tests or the requirements that the Act dictates for when you're able to issue a permit in a regulated area. And that identifies that a permit may be issued if, in the opinion of the authority, the activity is not likely to affect the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or unstable soil or bedrock. So relative to that first requirement, flooding is the only applicable test of concern. And secondly, the activity is not likely to create conditions or circumstances that, in the event of a natural hazard, might jeopardize the health or safety of persons or result in damage or destruction of property. So that's the second test that we have to be satisfied with in order to issue a permit. When we look at the UTRCA's Environmental Planning Policy Manual, as you know, this is the board approved policies that staff have the authority to work within to issue permits. When we look at our general policies for hazard limits, for flooding hazard limits, development and site alterations shall be directed away from hazardous lands where there's an unacceptable risk to public health or safety or property damage, and shall be directed to areas located outside of defined hazard lands. Policy 2 speaks to development and site alteration may only be permitted in hazardous lands, provided that all of the following conditions can be implemented to the satisfaction of the board. Appropriate flood proofing, protection works, safe and dry access during times of flooding or other emergencies. No new hazards will be created or aggravated. No adverse environmental impacts, and that the development does not include institutional uses or essential emergency services. So when we look at our specific riverine flooding hazard policies, it does speak to new development is generally not permitted within a floodway. And because this area is in a one-zone floodplain management area, that entire floodplain limit is considered the floodway. And when it speaks to access, it does say for new development, vehicular and pedestrian access must be dry. to an elevation that matches or exceeds the regulatory flood elevation, or for existing development and infill proposals, vehicular pedestrian access must be safe. And we use a measurement of 0.3 meters or 30 centimeters. That's consistent with the provincial technical guide. So they've identified that when you look at safe access, you should consider depth and velocity. And when we look at depth, 0.3 meters is the flood depth in which the average vehicle would have egress access problems. So that's the measurement, the maximum extent of flooding that we can consider for access, safe access considerations. So also we have to be considerate of the direction from the provincial planning statement in chapter 5. And as you'll see, these are all generally in line with what our UTRCA policies say as well. And that's the development shall be directed away from natural human hazards where there's an unacceptable risk to, again, public health and safety or property damage. That development shall generally be directed to areas outside of hazardous lands adjacent to rivers, stream, valleys that are impacted by flooding hazards. And then we have development and site alteration shall not be permitted within areas that would be rendered inaccessible to people and vehicles during times of flooding hazards, unless it's been demonstrated that the site has safe access appropriate for the nature of the development. The other piece to this one is development and site alteration shall not be permitted within a floodway, regardless of whether there's high points of, whether there's areas of inundation that have high points of land, like islands. So if it's surrounded by floodwaters, it's still prohibitive due to the risks of safe access. So that's the legislative policy frameworks that we have to consider to determine whether the application is appropriate for the issuance of a permit. And then I'll just quickly speak to the background and the application history. So in May of 2024, the applicant did pre-consult with staff. And at that time, staff advised of the regulatory jurisdiction, the hazardous lands that are associated with the property, as well as the prohibitive policies that would not support the construction of an ARU due to the flooding hazards associated with it. Later in 2024, the applicant did apply for a minor variance from the County of Oxford bylaw to facilitate the construction of a detached ARU within a proposed accessory structure, which would be prohibited under the existing municipal zoning district. Through our plan input and review program, planning staff did recommend refusal to the County of Oxford due to the associated flooding hazards and that it was inconsistent with the PPS and UTRCA policy. My understanding that the County of Oxford deferred a decision on that minor variance application, to provide the applicant an opportunity to address those concerns raised by the Conservation Authority. So on November 29th, 2024, a Section 28 application was formally submitted. It was originally deemed incomplete by staff as it required several pieces of information that's required by the application. And additional information was submitted by the applicant progressively between November 2024 and February 2026 before the subject application was considered complete. And I just referenced the chronology of that application process, recognizing it's been almost a 1.5 year process. That's provided in Appendix 6 of the staff report. So in May of 2025, UTRCA staff advised the applicant of changes to our approach in floodplain management decisions. So if you recall at the board level, there was some direction that gave discretionary powers to ARUs that we would remove. One would be we would consider safe access for new development, as that's the minimum standard under the provincial policy statement, although our current policies were requiring dry access, and that's what was relayed to the applicant originally in the pre-consultation. So for dry access means there's no flooding on the water, or on the road, on access to the development. And for safe access means a maximum of 30 centimeters or 0.3 meters of flood could be achieved on the water to maintain that. The other piece that was slightly changed is our original mapping included 0.3 meters of a freeboard. It was decided that through our flood mapping update process that we remove the freeboard from the flooding limits, but we would still require it for flood proofing and structures. So that was a change in what was originally communicated to the applicant throughout the process. So this kind of represents the best available flood information with the removal of the freeboard and for that consideration. So what was advised to the applicant, the measurements we'd be using is the regulatory flood elevation would be 267.2 meters. The building would have to be flood proof. Any buildings that would be permitted in the floodplain would have to be flood proof to an elevation of 267.5. And then considering the safe access flood depths of 0.3 meters, we advise that the road access to the new ARU would have to be a minimum of 266.9 meters. So also through the process, as I mentioned, it was a long 1.5 year process. There was concerns relative to progress. So we did identify to the applicant options that were available at that time. One, they could continue to supply the required information for the application to be complete. Two, they had an opportunity under the regulation to request administrative review regarding the completeness of the regulation. Or three, they could request referral to the hearing committee based on the information submitted to date. So it was in January of 2026 when a formal request was to try and schedule a meeting with the hearing committee and move it forward. And that happened prior to the application being complete on February 25th, 2026. So that provides a little bit of the history and the chronology of the timelines from when we started on the file to where we were today. So the summary of staff analysis, this is primarily relying on the grading plans that were submitted in support of the application. So the grading plan demonstrates that the proposed ARU is in an area located within the floodplain and below that regulatory flood elevation of 267.2. They have provided construction drawings for the ARU foundation with certification from an engineer that demonstrates that the finished floor would be at the floodproofing elevation of 267.5 and would address any concerns related to hydrostatic concerns. So the building is proposed to be floodproof, but still located within a floodplain. Also, when we look at the grading plan and the road centerline surveys, which again were submitted in support of the application, it demonstrates that there are areas of the existing driveway on the property, as well as Pigram Line access road, that are below the safe access elevation of 266.9. So these elevations confirm that more than the maximum 0.3 meters of flood depth will occur over the access roads under a 1 in 250-year flood event, which exceeds the maximum depths for vehicular safe access in accordance with the provincial technical guides. So based on that, staff did conclude that, the survey materials submitted in support of the application, even in consideration of those reduced flood standards that were decided on throughout the process, that it still maintained that the application proposes construction of an ARU located upon hazardous land subject to flooding and in an area where people and vehicles could be rendered inaccessible during flooding because the flood depths over the road would exceed those safe access requirements. There were just a few other factors I wanted to address before closing my presentation. Included in the applications were commitments from the Township of Southwest Oxford, a letter from August 7th, which originally indicated that they're prepared to construct the road and raise it to that 266.9 meter elevation. And then a subsequent letter on August 27th, 2025, which was confirming the road construction project has been completed to an elevation no less than 266.9 meters, that it was carried out in accordance with the approved engineering plans and relevant standards, and that the final elevations have been verified through site inspection and laser level. However, following the receipt of these letters, you can please switch the slide. I just lost control of my. So I did reach out to the road superintendent myself to ask about seeing if we could get a copy of those approved engineer drawings and standards that were used to construct the road. It was at that time he indicated to me that he was just relying on the surveys that were produced for this development, and that he was told that if he raised the road 7 inches, that it would fix all the flooding problems. So he was under the understanding that he would create dry access. This would fix all previous flooding issues that were in the past, and that it was an unscheduled roads maintenance. So they went out and placed approximately 7 inches of fill on the road, 200 to 250 meters from Reynolds Creek Bridge. But he also confirmed that they did not verify that through survey. He could only confirm they went out and placed regular maintenance for raising the road 7 inches. So in response to that, we did confirm that it was just standard maintenance procedures for a portion of the road, that it wasn't adequate assurances that the road has been constructed to engineered standards to ensure those grade elevations would be maintained over time and not impacted by regular vehicle traffic or associated surface degradation. So since that time, if I could have the next slide, please, Emily. This has also been discussed at regular council meetings of Southwest Oxford. Specifically, there was a meeting on November 18th that was addressing removal of reduced load restrictions. And there's a period of time at that council meeting, they were discussing wet roads within the municipality. And the road superintendent was asked if there were any roads that would be subject to flooding concerns. And his response, which I quoted there, was, I would say Pigram's the worst one. It has the potential to do it every year, and it's out of our control. Reynolds comes up and over and floods over Pigram line. So that was the report from the road superintendent to council on the issue of wet road municipality. During that meeting, they then get on to discuss that part of those concerns with maintenance of the drain and with the capacity of the culvert. So since following that meeting, staff, we met with the acting CAO and the road superintendent for Southwest Oxford because there was some interest of whether the municipality could do some road improvements to try and achieve safe access. So through that discussion, we identified that type of work would require a permit from the Conservation Authority as it's site grading and placement of fill within a regulated area in a floodplain. That we would need a survey done so that we understood the full extent of the roadworks in that area. That the proposed roadworks should be prepared to engineering standards and consider the impacts of flooding. And secondly, depending on the scale and scope of what would be required to fix that road, it may have a need for post-development flood model. So if that's a low dip in the road, that's likely the first point when that culvert reaches capacity and that water's rising and backing up. That's the first point the flood waters are going to overtop the road and continue on down the system. So by raising the road, you could actually be causing further backup and further delay in floodwaters upstream before it actually can overflow and continue on downstream. So by simply just raising the road could cause potential for increased flood depths and issues upstream and downstream of the road. So all of those things would have to be considered in order to consider doing road improvements to try and achieve that safe access requirement. That letter was included with a staff report that again was considered by council on January 6th, where it was just received for information and there was no direction to staff. I also wanted to quickly address the ARU regulations with the province. In 2022, it received royal assent for Ontario Regulation 299-19, which does make changes to the Planning Act, and it's to allow ARUs to supersede local official plans and zoning province-wide on any parcel of land, but only where residential uses are permitted in settlement areas with full municipal and sewage services. It also recognizes, except for legal non-conforming uses such as existing houses on hazard lands. And this is directly from the Environmental Registry of Ontario. That's also supported through the Southwest Oxford and County of Oxford bylaws relating to ARUs, where it does identify that ARUs in agricultural areas are not permitted on any lot containing natural hazards. Now that first test does have a caveat, unless clearance or approval is provided by the Conservation Authority. But it also has the second test that it's not permitted on any lot that does not meet provincial access standards during a regulatory flood event. And that's consistent in both the county and the lower tier bylaws. And finally, I just wanted to remind that, it speaks a little bit about past flooding and whether it's flooded there historically or not. It's the regulation that stipulates the flood standard that should inform our decisions. And it's based on the probability of a storm event. The regulation stipulates that it's the 1937 flood event standard that we should be using to inform our decisions, and that's equivalent to a 1 in 250 year flood event. So whether the property is historically flooded or there's issues with roads previously, our decision as it ties to development activity has to inform what that property would look like under the condition of a 1 in 250 year flood event. And we do know that there is a gauge, an Environment Canada gauge on Reynolds Creek. So we do know that over the last 25 years, the flows of Reynolds Creek have only peaked at a maximum of 35 cubic meters per second. And that's stuff our engineers certainly understand, but in comparison, we've modeled this and we know that during a 250 year event, which is the regulatory storm that should inform our decisions, peak flows could get as high as 110 cubic meters per second. So any flooding or concerns that have experienced over the last 25 years wouldn't be near the type of flooding concerns that would exist under a 1 in 250 year flood event. So based on all those considerations, it is recommendation of staff that the application for development activity at 5626 Pigram Line be refused for the following reasons. The application proposes construction of an additional residential dwelling unit within a regulated area that's upon hazardous lands subject to flooding hazards, and in an area where people and vehicles would be rendered inaccessible during times of flooding, which is contrary to provincial policy as well as UTRCA's natural hazard policies. So when we look at the tests of the Act, We're therefore of the opinion that the proposed development is, that under that 1 in 250-year flood event, the proposed development is likely to create conditions or circumstances that in the event of a natural hazard might jeopardize the health or safety of persons, which is contrary to the requirements of section 28.1 of the Act. And Mr. Chair, that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Like my procedure begs that I go to the applicant first with their presentation. We'll circle back to questions
Okay.
after both presentations have been concluded. I gotta stick to the script here, so. So at this time, I will turn the floor over to the applicant and or their agent who will present their material. So go ahead, please.
Thank you. And I think you have all been provided a hearing book that we submitted in advance. And so I'll just take you to some of the tab numbers and some of the information in that book. I will not be repetitive because I believe we agree on the standards. What I propose to do is show you where there's discretion and the areas in which it is actually de minimis would be the word I would use in terms of the areas where the elevation is not met. So what is before you today is whether a section 28 permit can be issued, including a section 28 permit with conditions. And we will propose some conditions this afternoon that will facilitate the construction of the ARU on the property on Pygram line. So the subject property is not a vacant parcel, and it currently includes the applicant's residence. And the parties agree that the permit application for the accessory residential dwelling is development activity as found within OREG 4124. It is located in hazardous land as defined by the regulation and regulated by the UTRCA, and is for the purposes of constructing an ARU. And just so you have some context, the property in question is approximately 38 hectares, 94 acres in size, and contains the applicant's dwelling that is approximately 3,200 square feet, along with a detached garage and a shed. And perhaps if we could go to page 94, that shows a site plan of the area, just so you get some context of it. The property subject is served by a private well and individual septic system. The accessory residential unit being proposed is approximately 1,500 square feet, 139 square meters. The size being 50% of the proposed building, it's going to be a mixed building, having some storage and then the ARU services in it. Now, the applicant has gone to some considerable work in terms of submitting the complete application, including doing elevations on the road, which has not been done by either the UTRCA or the township. We agree that section 28.1 of the Conservation Authorities Act prohibits development in areas regulated by the UTRCA such as this, but it's subject to the discretion that's set out in section 28.1. And that allows the issuance of a permit in circumstances where it is in the opinion of the Conservation Authority and you as the hearing panel, that the activity will not affect the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or unstable soil or bedrock, and it will not create conditions or circumstances that, in the event of a natural hazard, might jeopardize the health and safety of persons or result in the destruction of property. I'm going to put to you that safe access is an individual site-specific analysis based on site-specific information. And I will get into this in more detail in a little bit later, but I will draw you to those areas in which Pygram line exceeds the 266.9 standard. And I put to you that none of those elevations are actually in front of our client's property. Those elevations are to the north. So how far? How far do you go? In addition, those elevations, it works out, are de minimis. They're all less than 6 inches, some ranging from 2 to 5 inches in terms of along that road to raise it up. We're not talking about 3 feet, 4 feet, a meter and a half. We were talking about a couple of inches that may have been lowered due to wear and tear on the road. In addition, it is in your authority in terms of those areas along the driveway laneway to put in a condition on the permit that proof of the elevation of that driveway laneway has to be confirmed by the appropriate engineering elevations prior to occupancy. And that condition can be issued as a condition also of the building permit. So one of your conditions will be that prior to occupancy, that driveway laneway has to be at the appropriate standard, being the 266.9 elevation. And that ensures that safe access and egress. The area in front of the applicant's property all meets the acceptable standard and criteria. It is only when you get to the intersection of Doan Road and Pygram Line that it undulates from a couple inches. And the math that I did not do, the math that was done by the engineer, is it would take approximately 3 to 5 trucks of gravel to raise that area up to the appropriate 266.9. It really is de minimis. When you go to the south of the client's property, the applicant's property along Pygram Line, that meets the regulatory standards. So I just wanted to point that out because safe access is individual, site-specific, and a fact-specific analysis based on the site-specific information that you have the discretion to implement those conditions to ensure that that elevation standard is met, particularly on the driveway laneway. I'm just going to briefly take you through your discretion in the regulatory regime. So the PPS, the Provincial Planning Statement 2024, sets out the natural hazard policies applicable to the proposed ARU development on the subject property. Policy 5.1.1 requires that development be directed away from areas of natural hazards where there is unacceptable risk to public health or safety or property damage and not create new or existing hazards. And it states that generally, development shall generally be directed to areas outside of hazardous areas and sites. And that's policy 5.2.2. So that's generally directed away from. This is a property that has an existing development on it and proposing again an ARU. And the use of the term generally indicates that there are some circumstances where development can occur in those hazardous areas. Policy 5.2.3 of the Provincial Planning Statement is a prohibition on development and site alteration where areas are rendered inaccessible to people and vehicles during times of flooding hazards, unless it has been demonstrated that the site has safe access appropriate to the nature of the development and the natural hazard. And again, in the circumstances where it is demonstrated that the applicant is willing and required through a condition to raise the laneway driveway, that standard is met in terms of what is considered a safe access. And again, the Pygram Line in front of the applicant's property into the south meets the applicable standard. The UTRCA policies, namely the EPPM, the Environmental Planning Policy Manual, sets out that policy direction for UTRCA staff when reviewing these applications such as this. And 4.2.1.1 directs development away from hazard lands where there is an unacceptable risk to public health or safety or property damage. And 4.2.1.2 permits development in hazard land provided all of the following criteria has been met. And the criteria is as follows: appropriate flood proofing measures, protection works, and safe dry access during times of flooding, erosion, and other emergencies. You have heard how those flood proofing measures are being approved, and they are appropriate based on the engineer's submission, and confirm that dry access can be achieved in the circumstance. No new hazards are required and existing hazards are not aggravated. This is a property that undulates when you actually look at the elevations, and the bulk of the property actually meets the standard of 266.9. And the development does not include institutional uses or essential emergency uses, it is an ARU. This is not a subdivision This is not an intense development. It is an accessory residential unit that is small in size and again, can meet those regulatory standards. Section 4.2, policy 4.2.2 being the riverine policy hazards. I'm going to draw you to point 13, which speaks about access. And it says for new development, vehicular and pedestrian access must be dry to an elevation matching or exceeding the regulatory flood elevation. And in other words, safe access must be provided to the subject property. And again, I'm not going to go through the considerable history to this application. What I will tell you is in support of the application, engineering drawings and elevations and a site plan have been provided. Road elevations from Pygram Line, Putnam Road, and Gladstone Road have been provided. And the reason that all three of those roads have been provided is to show in terms of the municipality, the township, those roads, Gladstone Road and Putnam Road, do not meet the regulatory standard 266.9. So surely it's not the intention to freeze development throughout the entire municipality. It's that approach, that site-specific contextual approach that has to be taken into consideration, and reasonableness and those de minimis standards applied. There is also confirmation at tab 12, and you can leave it here on the site plan, at tab 12, that there is no possibility of structural flooding or damage as a result of any of the regulatory flood events. It has, so the UTRCA, I'm not going to bother taking you through the history. The parties agree on the standard to be applied, which is that minimum of 266.9. Tab 10 of the hearing materials, again, confirm that the average elevation estimate of the property and surrounding area is actually 267.02. Tab 13 of the applicant's document book, the grading plan prepared by Spreed Associates, confirms that the building meets the regulatory criteria, which you heard earlier today. And again, we have the small portion of the driveway that ranges in terms of elevation between 266.8 and 266.76. So roughly 0.1 and 0.2 being slightly below the 266.9 meters. And again, confirmation that this area can be raised to the satisfaction of the UTRCA being that 266.9 standard prior to any occupancy of the ARU. That access point to Pygram Line, if you look at those elevations, and the bulk of Pygram Line and all of Pygram Line in front of the applicant's property meets the 266.9 elevation criteria to the north and going south of the property. Tab 18 of the hearing book shows Putnam Road, which on average sits lower than the 266.9 elevation. And I just want to be clear, the applicant confirmed through the township on August 7th, 2025, its commitment to completing the roadworks to the specified elevation as part of the development and infrastructure improvements. The information presented before you today, there's no indication in terms of the comment regarding Pygram Line is closed often. Where on Pygram Line? Because in front of the applicant's house, it meets the regulatory standard. And just for information, the Ingersoll pollution plant sits at an elevation of 266.3 meters, which is below the UTRCA's elevation for safe access. More recently, as an example, on March 12, 2026, the area experienced significant flooding with warnings going out to the area and to most of City of London, Township of Southwest Oxford and the surrounding area about flood events occurring. Those photographs are in the hearing book. And the photographs taken on the applicant's property did not show any flooding, and the road did not show any flooding either at that time. Also on April 6, 2026, water levels were running high, and the UTRCA expressed concerns with flooded roads. Pygram Line was not closed, was not flooded during this event. So again, there's no dates or instances confirming when Pygram Line is closed by the municipality and where, merely indicating that road closure occurs from time to time. There are no dates, no information regarding the number of times the road has been closed, whether it be in the last 5, 10, or 40 years. The township is, in response to the UTRCA's comments and questions regarding the availability of safe access, provided their response. And it also needs to be noted, prior to the issuance of any building permit, those conditions, prior to the issuance of any occupancy permit, those conditions can be imposed. That is absolutely within your jurisdiction. So in summary, what you have before you is there's no information presented by UTRCA confirming that the road or property is subject to flooding. In fact, it is to the contrary. The recent 2 high water flooding events that resulted in significant road closures, no flooding occurred on the subject, in the subject property or in front of the subject property on the road. The final grading plan has not been submitted in support of the building report and the condition of that development, and will be submitted as a requirement of the building permit. The applicant has confirmed that that small portion of the driveway will be raised to meet the regulatory limit of 266.9. The township has confirmed it will raise that small portion of the road that is north and outside of our client's property at Doan Road. And again, the south meets the applicable criteria. The UTRCA has failed and neglected to take into consideration that in the event of emergency, there's actually 3 egress points to the proposed ARU, which could include Pygram Line, Daniel Road, and Prouse Road. And there is some outdated information being relied upon, and that is a function of the information available. So the UTRCA's information is approximately 8 years old, where we have recent information by the engineer before you from this year and last year. The flood event that was spoken about, being the 1937 flood event, represents a hazard risk of 0.4% chance in any given year. And the applicant has confirmed that no flooding has occurred on the property. And when you look at the levels that have been pointed up, the average in the last 24 years is 35 meters squared in terms of the flooding, when the 250-year storm is 4 times more than that, 110 meters squared. And we would ask you to consider, when you look at the flooding area based on this information generated, the entire area and the entire road network of Southwest Oxford would be considered a wet road and not safe access. And not all of those roads are closed. In the circumstances, it is appropriate for the Section 28 application to be approved, subject to those conditions requested, namely, the entirety of the driveway meet the 266.9 meter required elevation, which can be confirmed prior to occupancy, and only if necessary, that the township raised the road approximately, and again, it's approximately 2 inches, being 30 cubic yards of gravel, so 3 to 5 trucks of gravel, being approximately at a cost of $4,000. That's de minimis. That is not a significant elevation change. We are not before you today asking for the road be raised 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet. That's not the circumstances that you have been presented with. And to reiterate, the entirety of the of the applicant's property is actually within the regulatory standard along the road. The proposed development meets the conditions of the UTRCA's board-approved policies, being that EPPM manual and specifically policy 4.2.1.2. The applicant has confirmed appropriate flood proofing measures and safe and dry access during times of flooding will be provided. Letters were submitted from township personnel regarding the road and detailed information from its engineers, including engineered drawings. There are no new hazards created, and no aggravation of existing hazards. Again, this is a de minimis circumstance. The applicant can confirm that at no time have there been any signs erected on Pygram Line indicating that the road is closed due to flooding concerns. There are no adverse impacts. There's no unacceptable risk to public health or safety or of property damage, and existing hazards are not created. The area is not inaccessible to people and vehicles, and the applicant has demonstrated that safe access can be provided and appropriate for the nature of the development. And the proposed development is consistent with the PPS 2024. With that, those are our submissions, and both John Spreet from Spreet Engineering and the applicant are here this afternoon to answer and respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you. All right, at this time, the next step is staff and the Conservation Authority's agents may question the applicant and or their agent. If reasonably required for a full and fair disclosure of matters presented at the hearings. So I'll just look to staff to see if they have anything further.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just maybe a couple points just for.
Maybe I'll have you come to the.
Sure. Just a couple of points for clarification for what I heard from Ms. Lombardi. And Emily, if I could have page 146 of the agenda, that same site grading plan is referred to. This one here. So I believe Ms. Lombardi mentioned that the section of Pygram Line that's below that safe access standard was up at Doan Road and not in front of the property. And if I could ask you just to zoom in on the road section here in front of the property and see if we can read the elevations. I think there was about 7 elevations there directly in front of the property that are surveyed as being below 166.9. So the access depth areas is in front of the property according to the surveys that were submitted in support of the application. And if you can just scroll down a bit, I believe we can see 266.8, 266.8, and then 267. So there are some low-lying areas of the road directly in front of the property that don't meet 69 standard. Regarding the statements of the prior flooding, and again, I would note that it is statements from the Southwest Oxford Superintendent of past flooding, but those are flooding events that were not compared to the 250. So under a 250, it's much more severe. But the one tweet that I showed in my presentation was directly from the Township of Southwest Oxford on an event January 13th, 2020. It highlighted that it was closed between Doan and Prouse Road at the bridge, which would suggest it is that stretch in front of the subject property. And when I referred to the November council meeting where they were talking about wet roads in Southwest Oxford and the superintendent said Pygram Line's a problem, he was referring to Reynolds Creek. Reynolds Creek on Pygram Line is right at the subject property. So again, there's 2 points there that according to and again, I don't know the area. I'm just relying on the road superintendent for Southwest Oxford who's reporting this has been a problem for him in closing the road historically. And then the only other matter of clarification I wanted to point out is that the references to Putnam Road and Gladstone Road, those are further downstream of Reynolds Creek than Pygram Line. So the elevation that we gave for the flood elevation and the safe access elevation would only be applicable at Pygram Line, as we would have different elevations further downstream that would apply to Gladstone and Putnam. Whether they have safe access or not, I don't know. I didn't look at that information, but they wouldn't be held to the same elevation standard as Pygram. And the only other thing I would note is it was identified through those council meetings that it's not uncommon to have lots of roads within a municipality that don't meet safe access standards, because a lot of the development was done prior to floodplain knowledge. It was done prior to prohibitive regulations that are there today. So those landowners are subject to some level of risk under their current existence of those properties, and they have a right to maintain that risk. Well, what this application is asking is to increase the risk by putting another dwelling unit and another single family in an area of flood risk that under the 250-year storm could be subject to not safe access and flooding issues in there. So it's increasing the risk than what's existing today. So I just wanted to kind of just highlight a couple of those clarification points from what we heard in the presentation.
Anything further? No.
That's all I have.
All right, all right.
Could I just, apologies, there is a clarification, that I just want a small correction, and I apologize. We will leave you these new plans, which are, one of them is found at tab 18. And it has the recent elevation levels, February 2025 on it. Those are outdated elevation levels. I just wanted to clarify that.
There's one from October 2025. Is that
Yes,
from-
this one is from February 28th, from July 2nd, 2025 is the most recent one, and that's at tab 18. And we will leave this for you. I just wanted to clarify so there was no confusion.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I don't think staff have seen those updated survey drawings of February 2020.
Of 18, sorry, yeah.
Of the hearing package, it wasn't part of the application package that we previously.
Yes, absolutely correct.
New for clarity for the chair and the committee members there. I'll call it a new set of elevation numbers as of February.
July, the most recent is July 2nd, 2025.
At second. 2025, and that's found on tab 18.
A portion of it, and we'll leave you the large size drawings because they're easier to read, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, I guess at this portion of the meeting now that the applicant and or their agent may question the Conservation Authority staff and or their agent further on the matter. So was there anything?
no, I just wanted to correct that, and
Got it.
in fairness to Mr. Gordon, these were recent and then submitted after when we were putting the hearing book together. That's the only correction.
Right. Okay, so if there's nothing else to be presented from the applicant, then our next step in our procedure, the hearing committee will question if necessary both the staff and the applicant or their agent. So there's the colleagues for questions. I'll start with Sam.
Chair, through you. Ms. Lombardi's presentation and indicated access egress points at Daniel Road and Kraus Road from the property. I didn't see that on any of the maps, so can somebody show me that?
Sure.
If you,
I need a picture of the property.
Maybe is it possible to go to my presentation?
Sure.
On the aerial photograph, maybe these wakes. I think that's the only map we'll stay for.
agreed. Thank you.
Probably the first.
I think it was the first couple.
There maybe, is that showing enough?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, hearing members, thank you. So the location of the current dwelling is right here on the west edge of the property. Okay. The property line to the north, that purplish bluish Turkish line, it travels all the way, and then you can see an access road that.
Sorry, do we have a laser level?
Perfect. Now we're going. So this is where my current house is. There's a laneway that travels along the property this way, and then you can see the laneway that completely travels out to Daniel Road. So that's a second access that we have. That access is large enough to take dump trucks, tractors, excavators, all my equipment. And then if you come this way around along the drain, and then there's an access that travels this property line, travels this laneway you can see, and it comes, and then there is a right of way that I own, goes right through this property to Preps. So in total, there's 3 accesses from my property to leave the premises to both access Daniel and Preps Road. If that.
That answers my question.
Thank you.
an opportunity to look at that map when we have our discussion after conclusion. There was also, I was trying to clarify the actual building itself, the ARU, and what elevation it needs to be at. There's a reference to a previous provided elevation of 267.5. But there was also something about 272.2, or I understand the issue of the driveway and the road, but there was also for floodproofing requirements, an elevation requirement as well. So first, Mr. Chair, through you to Joe. Can I get an answer on that?
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the flood elevation, we added the 30 centimeter freeboard for the floodproofing elevation. Sorry, I don't have it correctly in front of me. I don't want to mess it up, but I can confirm that they have met that with the foundation. So the foundation, the finished floor of the ARU is at the floodproofing elevation of 267.5, which includes that freeboard above the flood elevation. So it has met the floodproofing elevation.
Through the chair again to Joe. So would that, if we decide to approve this with conditions, would that need to be a condition or is that a given?
It's demonstrated in the drawings, so it would be, they'd be bound by the drawings that they've submitted.
And the drawings are stamped by a professional engineer. Okay. That's it at this moment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, looking to the other colleagues on the committee, any questions for either the authority or the applicant? Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, from the chair through the applicant, whoever wants to answer, I brought up the Oxford County Glimmer map, which I'm sure people have access to, just a glimmer map. It looks like what I'm curious about is just sort of a description of the property itself. It looks like it's like there's lots of ponds and lots of water on it. So that's the kind of description I'm looking for, first of all, if you can.
So it's,
The lay of the land is the,
yeah, it's,
obviously, if there's water already there, in theory, someone could say, well, why don't you just dredge all the ponds and you'll have more access to more water can be stored on property, that kind of theory.
right. So our position since day one is we're willing to do whatever they ask of us to comply. That's been our common sense approach to it. Just not to get off topic, but the driveway, for example, it would be kind of silly from my perspective to have construction equipment coming in and building an ARU and destroying a nice new driveway. And that's why I'm trying to be reasonable and say, definitely do it, not a problem. We'll do it after construction though, so that it doesn't get destroyed. But to your question, yeah, it's a former quarry. That's what it was. It was a former quarry. And so I took ownership of it in 91. We built the current residence in 95. I've lived there ever since. The pond is my nature product. We have nesting bald eagles now. We have increased the fish resources to the point that it's a pretty amazing property, and the water that there receives nothing from the drain. There is absolutely zero drain water enters that body of water. It's all spring fed. And so that's why, and it's very important to me. I don't really want any drain water into it, because it would undo everything that we've been trying to do for 30 years and making it a very natural fish habitat. Thus, it's proving, that's why we have nesting bald eagles and ospreys and otters and minks and everything now, they need food. So that's kind of been our work on that project. 30 years there and it's never been a concern. So, but that's what the history is. It's a previous quarry, all man-made.
And directly across the street from the property line is actually Middlesex.
Correct.
To me, it looked like that's the way it was.
And if you go to the other corner, it's Elgin. But yeah, it's a county line. You know, traversed by school buses from 2 different districts on a daily basis. So yeah, it's what it was.
Okay, anything further, Mark? No? Jim, do you have any questions at this time?
I think most of my questions have been asked, but I did have one question, and I'm pretty familiar with a lot of ARUs that I've seen in other areas, so. I was just curious to know, what is your intent on the use of the?
Good question. I appreciate that question. So I'm 70. My mother stayed on the home farm, which is just around the corner, until she was 95. Because I was able to maintain her quality of life, check on her every day, do things for her. And we're getting to the age, my son wants to come back to the property. And it will allow my wife and I to live on that property much longer. It's a lot of maintenance, it's trails, it's those trails I described as access routes. I maintain them. And so my son's going to be able to help us into our golden years, trying to keep us out of nursing homes, which are, there's not enough of them, and nobody brags about the quality of life there. So our goal is, and that's what started this whole process, was so that our family could continue to be there, exist there, and maintain it to the standards that we have built, and that my wife and I can finish out our years, close by, helped by family. And in the future, they have a son. I could actually go to him. I have another son in Georgia who comes home to visit. It can be used as a guest house temporarily. So I guess, unfortunately, my position is, it's a 4-bedroom house that I live in now. All we're adding is 2 bedrooms. That's the only thing that's changing at the property, is 2 bedrooms. And there's no more people living there. I raised a family, there was 5 of us lived there until they all went and got jobs. And that's all that's gonna be there now. And so that's our intent. That's the logic behind the whole process, is just to create something for my wife and I, so that we can finish out our days as long as possible at that location, and get some help from my son and his wife and grandson to help me look after the property. And yeah, I certainly have no intent of bringing my family home to a dangerous situation. That answers. Thank you.
You're good, Jim?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, I'll go back to Sandy for the question.
Thank you. So I think the road elevation issue along the property, there were those 2 sections. I think that Lombardi referred to it as like 0.1 centimeter. It's a county road in front of the property, is that right? For the chair?
It's a township borderline. Southwest I'm wrong. I can get clarification because there is a counselor here, but across the road is Middlesex, Thames Center. This side is Southwest Oxford, Oxford County. I believe Southwest Oxford is responsible for that section. I think that's how they divvy it up. Thames Center looks after a portion. Is that true, George? Thanks. And so that section falls into Southwest Oxford.
Part of the question I had through the chair was, Ms. Lombardi says like 3-4 gravel trucks.
Correct.
Worth. If maybe through the chair to Joe, can we put a condition on a township road?
It is tough because we can't issue permits for works on property outside the ownership of the applicant without landowner authorization. That's now embedded in the new regulation as part of complete application, that a landowner authorization would have to be given. So that would be a sticky piece, that in order to issue the permit, you would probably want to have buy-in from the township and a landowner authorization that they're willing to do that, or a separate. If the municipality was to do it on their own, it'd be a separate application and permit, I would imagine. Do the roadworks first.
The other question I had about the road, and it just came up. And I hear the issue that the owner has raised is you're going to have construction on the site. You don't want the trucks to tear up a new road or new gravel, et cetera, et cetera. So if we do decide to put conditions on this application, that the driveway in its totality to Pigram Road has to be 266.9 or higher. How do you do that after construction?
Sorry, your jurisdiction would be, I would put a condition on that prior to any occupancy permit being issued, because you work collaboratively with the township and the township needs the section 28 permit. So prior to occupancy, that the applicant has to confirm to both the UTRCA and the township. And I would put both in because it's the township's jurisdiction on the occupancy permit, that the driveway meets the required 266.9 elevation.
If I could just add to that too, I think that that's a little bit of a concern from our end. I think that typically works with a building code permit because the municipality can control occupancy. I don't think we have any ability to control whether occupancy happens or not.
No, that's not, you wouldn't, sorry, let me clarify. You're correct. You would not determine occupancy. You would say that the building permit, right, with the township is required to confirm the road elevation with the UTRCA to 266.9. So I'm, just for Mr. Gordon's, I'm throwing the jurisdiction to the municipality to confirm with you that it meets the 266.9, because Mr. Gordon is correct, that's the township's jurisdiction, but that's how you would that's how you would make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, follow up on the last question. And this goes to both the authority and the applicant or their agent. So following up on Miss Lombardi's premise, once the confirmation of 266.9 minimum elevation's been completed and occupancy is allowed to take place in that event, what's the procedure, the manner going forward to maintain that minimum elevation into the future? I guess that's my question. How does that grade remain the same and not diminish or over time?
I'm gonna get into a little bit of other jurisdiction. I would say to you, it's no different than, if you think about it, it becomes a condition of the building permit requires the section 28, then the section 28 requires the elevation of the road. So it's no different than what a building code requirement would be, that you use X percentage of insulation or your width of your 2x4s, because it would be your condition that's solidified through the plans on that building permit. Well, if it did not meet, the township could come back and say you don't meet your requirements of your building permit.
I guess I'm struggling with who's going to check. Maybe I'll phrase the question a different way. In 5 years from now, who's going to come back and check and ensure that that top of grade is still meets the minimum requirement? And if it doesn't, then what's the remedial steps?
Well, I would say either can, right? So either the UTRCA can contact the township and say, I don't believe that meets the grade, or the township can, and then require it through their enforcement mechanisms. It would be an order. You would flip. What I'm recommending you do is that you pull this in under the building code, which can require section 28 permit, right? Through the township's jurisdiction of buildings. And so by pulling it in that way, I would also argue then they have the jurisdiction to issue an order if it's a circumstance of non-compliance.
I could add to that, Mr. Chair. I think a couple of things. I think once the Conservation Authority issues the permit's valid for a certain number of years to satisfy the condition, and we would have control during that time. But once the permit expires, beyond that expiry, we can only regulate development activity. We can't force someone to fix a problem or because they didn't meet the permit before. So we wouldn't have the authority once the permit conditions have expired to be able to require the municipality to do it. And I don't think the building code could either, because it's not a building related situation. So there is some technicalities there. I think it is a good question. It was raised, we raised it through our communication on that about the degradation. And I think in an application process, we would put that on an engineer to demonstrate how would they be able to construct the road to provide those assurances. Whether it means you have to go higher than 7 inches to account for degradation, or you're constructing a different type of a road with protective measures to ensure it. But we would typically through the application process, put that on the applicant to provide the engineering assurances of how you would address that issue.
I am,
as a follow-up, and then I'll come
Yeah.
back to you. So you mentioned, Joe, that once the permit expires, so what's the typical, when would, in this scenario, when would this permit expire? Like how long does? the
So-
permit valid?
So under the Conservation Authorities Act, there's been recent changes now that allow permits up to 5 years. We usually only apply that under circumstances that require one of that length. Typically, we do 1 or 2 years on a development application. But you can put conditions to monitor, report, have the applicant verify before the permit expires that it's still there. But once that permit is done, we wouldn't have any authority to regulate or require unless they propose to do a development activity.
Somewhere between 0 and 5 years is when
Under the act, you have the ability to issue it up to 5 years.
thank you, and I'll turn back to you now.
sorry, I was confused. You were speaking about the driveway, correct? The laneway?
Yes,
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. And I would suggest that's no different than any other permit you issue in terms of decks and making sure decks are within their appropriate distance and size. You have the 5-year period and then after which it lapses.
great, thank you. Looking at my colleagues, if they have any questions. Jim, go ahead.
And through the chair, if I'm remembering correctly, the boundary road is gravel, but your driveway is actually paved.
It's a reclaimed asphalt,
Is it reclaimed? Okay.
and that's part of my, if it was just gravel, it'd be done by now. But because of the reclaimed asphalt, I don't wanna destroy what I currently have. I'm more than willing to raise it to whatever number. Once we're done running gravel trucks, cement trucks, construction equipment all over the driveway, that's common sense for me.
Okay, anything else? I guess maybe I had one other question. The alternate points of entry and exit that Mr. Patton shared with us. Is there any sense of what those grade upper road elevations are like, or?
That information.
I didn't think so, but being as we're here, when it was mentioned, I just thought I'd ask, so. Okay. All right, last call for questions. Don't see any further, so at this point, the hearing committee will move into deliberation. Thank you for the authority and thank you for the applicant and their agent for the presentations and information. So
You could just leave it.
so I'll look to the committee members for a motion to move into deliberation at 2:35 P.M. Moved by Sandy, seconded by Jim. All those in favor? Okay, so we will move into,
Yeah, they've all left.
Dean's got more work to do.
Get it online.
We are good.
set?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so noting this, current time is 3:38 PM. Committee has completed its consideration of the information presented and done its delegation work, and we've arrived at the following decision. The decision being that the application number 195-24 be approved with the following conditions. Firstly, that the applicant provide an updated grading plan that shows the proposed elevation of the driveway on the property to be at least 266.9 meters or higher, and that such work be completed and confirmed upon completion of construction and prior to occupation of the additional residential unit. Secondly, that a copy of the engineer stamp detailed construction drawings and interior floor plans that confirm floodproofing to be a condition of the issuance of the section 28 permit to be submitted to the UTRCA. So with that, scroll down, please. With that, this hearing committee's decision will be communicated to the applicant and the owner or their representative in writing. So that concludes the announcement of the decision. So recommendation reads as follows, that the hearing committee adjourn the hearing for application number 195-24 at 3:40 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Sandy, second by Jim. Discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. And so that moves us from item 5 to item 6 on our agenda. Item 6 being adjournment, being that there is no further business to discuss. Recommendation that the meeting of this hearing committee be adjourned at 3:40 p.m. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by Mark, second by Jim. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried unanimously, and we are adjourned. Thank you.